Hi, I'm Gina Díaz, the right attorney. Real estate contracts can be complex and sometimes difficult to understand. That is why I want to walk you through some important clauses that should always be included in your real estate contracts. Number 1, address, PIN, and parties. Make sure that you identify the right address that corresponds with the right PIN, which is the property identification number, and the proper parties associated with that transaction. Many times, people will put the right address, but it'll have the wrong PIN, and the person that has signed on behalf of either the buyer or seller are not actually authorized to enter into that transaction. That's why it's very important that those 3 items be included correctly from the beginning. Make sure that you set the purchase price and the financing terms from the beginning. For example, if you're going to buy it via regular financing, you should set that up. If you're going to buy it cash, you should mention that. Or if you're going to buy it cash or maybe financing, you're not sure, then that should also be stated within the terms of the contract so there are no surprises later. Set a realistic closing date and realistic closing costs. A lot of times people just assume that they can close in 1 week or 2 weeks, and that's what they put on the contract. And then the other party is relying on that to the surprise that they're not able to. So I always say be realistic with the closing date so that the closing date is as close to the projected date of the contract as possible. No one likes to enter into a contract that they thought they were going to close in 2 weeks. A month later, they're still trying to close it. So be realistic with the closing date and identify the particular closing costs that the buyer will cover versus what the seller will cover. Don't just put closing costs to be covered by buyer, because closing costs is a very general term and it can mean a lot of things. So be as specific as possible when it comes to putting that in a contract. Identify the real estate taxes and any special assessments associated with the property. Now more than ever, taxes can really impact your ability to be able to qualify for a property. So make sure that you identify those real estate taxes, and if you need a certain amount of credit, you put that in the contract. For example, if you are saying, I will need credit for the real estate taxes up to 120%, that should be on there. Identify if there's any type of exemptions, homeowners exemption, senior free, senior exemption, and look at the disclosures to make sure that those exemptions actually qualify for the seller. If not, you need to make sure that you ask the seller to add those exemptions back into the contract, as they have no right to it, because you don't want to get charged for it a year or 2 after closing. Set up the proper contingencies. Every contract has contingencies. You have attorney review contingency, you have a financing contingency, you have an appraisal contingency. So make sure that those contingencies are very well spelled out and that you don't waive them unless it is something that you have agreed. For example, a lot of times people waive a home inspection contingency for whatever reason. I don't advise you to do it, but if that's something that you're willing to waive, you can put that on there. Otherwise, make sure that you are properly asking for the right amount on those contingencies and you're not waiving them. State the default terms. What happens if the buyer cannot perform under the contract and a contingency was never established? What happens if the seller cannot perform under the contract? What is going to happen? Who's going to get what? What are the ramifications? And to what point can anyone cancel a contract without further ramifications? So make sure that your default terms are clearly laid out in your contract. For more tips and more advice, make sure you like and follow. And as always, if you have a real estate contract you need reviewed or a transaction you need help with, make sure you call the right attorney.